Hey guys, how's it going? Justin here with Keystone Mountain Outdoors. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be continuing along in our RT1500 trimmer series. Today, we're going to show you one of the bigger selling points to the RT1500, and that is its ability to convert 223/556 brass to 300 blackout brass with literally the pull of a handle. Now I know guys have been converting 223 brass to 300 blackout for years by using a chop saw and resizing it and doing this and doing that. But with this setup here, literally you run the handle on your press, especially if you got a case feeder and a progressive press like my Dillon 750 here, you're literally able to pull a handle and you don't have to touch the cases, anything like that. As long as you got lubricated cases in your case feeder, pull the handle, it does all the work for you. It is pretty cool, some of the stuff that this thing can do. So without further ado, let's go over to the bench and let's talk about some of the parts and pieces that you're going to need to do 300 blackout on the RT1500. Alright guys, so what I have laid out for you here on the bench is everything that you're going to need to do 300 blackout with the RT1500 trimmer. There is a couple things I want to talk to you guys about in this portion of the video. So let's get into what you're going to need. So of course you're going to need your RT1500 trimmer itself. You're going to need a trim die. Now this is where some of the talking starts. So there's a couple different companies that make them. Whidden, CH4D, Lineman, and Dillon themselves make trim dies for 300 blackout, as well as there may be a couple other companies that I'm missing. Those are the big four though. Now, this right here is a Dillon trim die, and it is expensive. Dillon only offers the 300 blackout trim die in carbide. Now, if you're not familiar with the advantages to carbide in a rifle die, it's going to aid in longevity. That only really matters if you're a commercial operation where you're doing hundreds of thousands of rounds a year. Also, they claim that carbide is supposed to be a little bit smoother. Now, in a rifle die, you still have to use lubrication, and honestly, I haven't been able to feel that much of a difference using this carbide die. The big downside to using the carbide die is the cost. So this is a $200 trim die. I know you guys are probably thinking that's crazy. Well, it's early 2021 and this was the first one I could find in stock, so I went ahead and bought it. But I actually do have a buddy who lives out in Ohio by CH4D, and he managed to get me one of their 300 blackout trim dies. CH4D, Lineman, and Whidden Gunworks sell regular steel trim dies for 300 blackout, and they range anywhere from about 50 bucks all the way up to about $90. So even the most expensive one from, I believe Whidden's is the most expensive, it's half the cost of the Dillon. Now it isn't carbide, but like I said, do you really need a carbide trim die? Unless you're a commercial operation, I would say save your coin and get the standard one. Now another thing I want to talk to you guys about this trim die, you'll see my jam nut. This is the motor jam nut. This is what's going to set your cutting depth, and it's what your motor's going to, or your trimmer's going to snug up against. Now you guys will see I drilled and tapped mine here, and I may end up selling these to the public if there's enough interest for it. But yeah, it works really nice because this is set. So as long as I screw it in, I set my sizing operation up right, which I kind of know where it needs to be, I should be able to screw my trimmer down and not have to worry about readjusting it. And then most of the time I'm not going to be taking this trim die out of the tool head, so I'll be able to take my trimmer off to use it on other calibers such as 223 or whatever. And then whenever I put it back on, I don't have to worry about readjusting it. I just screw it down and tighten it up against this jam nut, and it should be pretty good. So yeah, if you guys are interested, I may end up selling these. They basically have a set screw in them with a piece of lead shot on the other end. But enough about the trim dies, we've rambled on long enough. The next thing you're going to need is a shortened tool head. This one here is from Dillon. These range from about $50 or so up to about $55 or so. There's some other companies that make them. Whidden makes one that's really nice, and then the eBay people, Joffers or whatever it is, they make them and they're about $45 or so. Honestly, I have a buddy who bought the eBay one and he wasn't too impressed with the machine quality, nor was I. I would recommend spending the extra $5 or $10 and getting yourself a Dillon or a Whidden short tool head. The machine quality on these is so much better. Other than that, I did make a custom wrench for my jam nuts. Now this isn't something that I'm going to sell to the public. I just kind of made this because the motor jam nut is 1.125", and if you ever used an 1.125" wrench, they're pretty big, and whenever you have your jam nut in here in the recessed shortened tool head, it can be really tough to get in there to actually be able to snug it up or anything like that. So I did kind of make myself a little custom wrench. You guys might want to look into doing that for yourself. It's not a necessity, but it is kind of nice to have. Whenever you put the set screw on that jam nut, it really kind of makes it a moot point. It doesn't really matter. I just use it as a holdback. But yeah, that's not a necessity, just something I wanted to talk about. So now let's go over, and I'm going to show you guys how I get this thing set up. We're not going to go as in-depth as we did in our 223 video as far as setting this up, because it is basically the same exact setup. But enough rambling on. Let's get over there and let's show you guys at least somewhat how to do it. Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and get our trimmer set up to trim 300 Blackout on the Dillon 750. One thing I want to mention, I'm using a 223 conversion kit for my 750. We're converting 223 brass to 300 Blackout brass, so you're easily able to do this. Now, if you were just trimming existing 300 Blackout brass, the only thing that you would have to change out would be this case feed adapter. You could pick up the 300 Blackout version of the case feed adapter for about $10, $10, $15 or so from Dillon. There's a couple people that 3D print them as well. So you're gonna start by installing your tool head, which is pretty simple. You guys should all know how to do that. Then you're going to take your trim die and you're going to start to screw it down. Now, there's a bunch of different ways of setting this. What Dillon actually recommends on their website is to set it how you set any other sizing die. Everybody does it different. Everybody has their own way of setting them. The way I like to go about setting my sizing die is I will screw it down till it bottoms out on the shell plate, and then I'll back it off about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of a turn. I find that that gives me a pretty good shoulder bump as far as on this. I've set this up a couple times before recording this video, so I know that's going to get me my 5,000 shoulder bump. Alright guys, so off camera what I went ahead and did was I took a 300 Blackout case. Now I feel it works best as far as setting your sizing die to size properly. Use an existing 300 Blackout case, and what I did was I took a lubricated 300 Blackout case and I ran it up in there. I made sure it dropped in and out of my case gauge, made sure it worked good. I also went ahead and went through the process of measuring the shoulder bump to assure that my die is set properly, which it was. Now at this point, what we could do is we could go ahead and start to screw our trimmer on itself. Now, at this point, you would first install your motor jam nut. Now, being that my motor jam nut is drilled and tapped and has the set screw in it, whenever I screw this down and I snug it up against that jam nut, my cutting depth should already be preset. What I like to do though is whenever I'm screwing it down, I like to put a hold back, and that's where a regular 1 1/8" wrench doesn't really work good in here. But I hold back on that jam nut and I just snug the motor up against that jam nut pretty good. That way I know it's not going to go anywhere. If you haven't already set your trimmer up, or you don't have one of these jam nuts with the set screw on them, you would just simply screw it down and you would slowly make adjustments. You would loosen the jam nut up, screw it down a little bit further, and then snug the motor to it, and keep doing that in small incremental adjustments until you achieve the desired trim length that you are looking for. Now, to kind of save time in the video, because I already covered this in the last video setting it up, and I showed you guys actually how to go through the process. Again, really easy. Just simply work it down until you achieve the proper trim length that you want. But with 300 Blackout, whenever you're not using a shop vac adapter, it makes a mess of your press, because converting 223 brass to 300 Blackout, you're taking a lot of brass off that case. And if you don't have your shop vac adapter hooked up, it just throws the brass all over your press and makes a giant mess. I didn't want to go through that process again, and since I already showed you guys once, I figured we would skip that here. Also, it would show off how nice these jam nuts are. So again, if you guys are interested, let me know and I may start selling these to the public. But at this point, we could just go ahead and hook up our power adapter. We could put our shop vac adapter on and start to hook up our shop vac, and then we could get to converting some 223 brass to 300 Blackout, or again, you could trim regular 300 Blackout brass however you will. But I'm going to go ahead off camera and I'm going to get the shop vac adapter hooked up, and we're going to go ahead and start processing some brass. All right, guys. So as you guys saw, this thing does a pretty good job at converting that 223 brass to 300 blackout. Now, one thing I want to mention, you could just process standard 300 blackout brass. If you have a bunch of 300 blackout brass, you could go ahead and you could process that without needing to do any sort of adjustments or anything like that. One thing I do want to mention, I'm using a 223 caliber conversion kit for my 750. If you're doing 300 blackout and just trimming it a little bit, you're going to need to switch out your case feed adapter over here for a 300 blackout one. You don't have to buy the whole conversion kit. The case feed adapter is only about $10–15 or so. Whenever you load, you're going to need the metering insert for your powder measure. Those run about $15–20 or so. So you don't need to buy a whole conversion kit for 300 blackout. You could just buy the powder funnel and the case feed adapter to load 300 blackout on the 750. So let's cover some other things. So in the first video, I talked about the fact that the trimmer, the way it works is it's going to size that case down and it's going to trim it. A traditional sizing die has an expander ball that it pulls back through it. Being that this is a trim setup, it has nowhere for the expander ball. So these necks are a little bit tight. So what I recommend guys to do is to run an expanding mandrel die. You can pick them up. Lyman makes them. They're rather cost effective. They're about $20–30 or so. I like to run mine in station 1 on my loading tool head. It just expands those necks a little bit. It makes your bullet seat a lot easier. You don't have to worry about damaging a bullet or damaging the necks of the cases because it's so tight in there. So that's one thing I wanted to mention there. Another thing I want to talk about is how the trimmer trims. Now, it does a pretty good job in trimming the brass. You're taking a lot off of it. What I find is that whenever I get the brass up in there, I'll actually go slow in pushing it up because you are trimming a lot. You could force it, but it's just working the motor harder than honestly you need to work it. Just take your time and push it up in there. It only takes maybe 2 seconds to trim a piece of brass. I like to hold for about ½ a second at the top. What that allows it to do is to get a real nice clean cut on there, and it helps knock off any burrs. As far as addressing the chamfer deburr portion of this trimmer, what I like to do with my brass is I'll just throw it in my wet tumbler with stainless steel media. What I find that works there is it's going to knock off any burrs. I don't go through the hassle of chamfering and deburring my cases when using this trimmer. It produces such a clean cut, and then running the wet tumbler, running my cases through the wet tumbler, those stainless steel medias are going to kind of dull those edges, so it makes it really easy. I don't feel it to be a necessity to chamfer and deburr my cases. I think this does a pretty good job, but if you want to, you could definitely go that route. Now, that's pretty much all I got for you guys as far as it goes. A shop vac, adapter, your trim die, your trimmer, and then of course your short tool head, and you'll be off to the races in trimming 300 blackout brass, or better yet, converting 223/556 brass to 300 blackout. So if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely smash that like button. If you guys have any comments, questions, anything like that, feel free to post this down in the comment section below. I also will leave my email in the description. If you guys are interested in those lock nuts, if I decide to sell them to the public, definitely shoot me an email or post a comment down below or something, and get a hold of me that way. So yeah, guys, that's all I got for you guys. Remember to train hard, shoot fast, and most importantly, be safe. God bless.